Reverend Cruz, I know that when sometimes it's hard for family members to watch their loved ones run for public office because all kinds of things are said about them. And I wonder, what is something that we don't know about Ted Cruz that you would like to share with us?
Well, I'll have to go back to his childhood because...
Please don't.
Actually, I can tell you 3 or 4 things that were very, very interesting. First of all...
Well, look at the time.
One of the greatest things that happened to Ted at a young age, that unlike me, he came to Christ when he was 8 years old. And as a matter of fact, I remember when he was 11, he went to a mission trip to Honduras. And this little kid, 11-year-old, led the ex-mayor of Tegucigalpa, the capital of Honduras, to the Lord. And he came back high as a kite. I mean, he was exhilarating. But let's go back a little earlier, when he was 9 years old. That was 1980. He had just turned 9. And I had just become involved in an organization called the Religious Roundtable, which was a Judeo-Christian organization that worked hand in hand with a Virginian organization called Moral Majority that Jerry Falwell funded. And so those 2 organizations working together, we mobilized millions of Christians across America to help elect whom I consider the greatest president since Abraham Lincoln, President Ronald Reagan. And so all during that year of 1980, Ted was 9 years old. Our conversation around the dinner table was about why we had to get rid of this socialist, progressive Jimmy Carter and replace him with a Christian constitutional conservative like Ronald Reagan. So every day for a year, when Ted was 9 years old, he got a dose of conservative politics from a Christian worldview. But I tell you, the one thing that really marked the rest of his life, when he was 13, just entering high school, through a client of ours, we introduced him to a man by the name of Roland Story. Roland Story was the president of an organization called the Free Enterprise Institute. So this kid is now just 13. He's reading Adam Smith and John Locke and von Mises and Hayek and Bastiat and Montesquieu and the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers and Milton Friedman. 13 years old. And then this organization creates a group of 5 kids. They call them the Constitutional Corroborators. What a name. They hired a memory expert and they taught these 5 kids, that was one of those, how to memorize the entire US Constitution. They used what was called a mnemonic device where they would memorize a string of letters and recreate the text from those letters. By the way, he can still do that today. So anyway, during the next 4 years, they traveled the state of Texas. They will come to a luncheon meeting, typically Rotary clubs. And while people were having lunch, they would put 5 easels in the front of the room. I got to tell you this. I told that story to the group, a bunch of homeschoolers. None of those kids knew what an easel was. I had to tell them, well, it's like a giant notepad with a tripod. But anyway, they would put 5 easels in the front of the room, and while people were having lunch, these kids would write the Constitution by memory, and then after lunch proceed to give a half-hour patriotic speech on free market economics and the Constitution. During the next 4 years, my son Ted did approximately 80 speeches on free market economics and the Constitution. Before Ted left high school, he was passionate about the Constitution. He was passionate about the Declaration, about free markets, about limited government, about the rule of law. And that passion became like fire in his bones. And the reason I know that my son Ted Cruz will not compromise his principles in Washington is that fire is as alive today as it was over 30 years ago.